Welcome to the Humour in Games podcast, an analog and video games podcast about how humor is experienced, designed, and analyzed in games.
We are Scott DeYoung,
Mark Lajeunesse,
and Andre Zanescu,
and we'll be your guides in this 6-episode series. Throughout each episode, we'll break down different theories and forms of humor. We'll draw on interviews with designers, critics, and academics as they discuss the different aspects of humor, their own lived experiences, and how their work utilizes humor in games. Today we chat with Cleaver Tan, an animator, game developer, and co-founder of Cleaver Endeavor Games to talk about their popular title, Ultimate Chicken Horse.
I'm Cleaver Tan. I originally from Calgary and moved to Montreal, I guess, about 10 or 11 years ago now. I grew up being like a big physics nerd, except like halfway through high school, I was like, oh, I've been doing all this 3D animation stuff on the side more and more until I finally missed some big deadline that I had to do.
Right.
So I went to art school and did animation there. Well, I went to art school to learn some art stuff and then came to Concordia for film animation. So studied film animation for 3 years there. So that was 2D and some 3D and some old school hand-drawn stuff and some digital stuff. I took a few programming courses, but not too much, and I left Concordia to do freelance animation for a few years.
Okay.
2D art in TV Paint and 3D art in Maya, Cinema 4D, things like that. Always doing a little bit of game stuff on the side.
Right.
I had some game projects that I did just as a hobby. Like I randomly met another developer who lived in Israel, and we only ever met through the internet.
Right.
I've never met him in person, and I helped do the art for a game called Gamer Mom, which is a game about you're the mother in a family, and you're trying to convince your daughter and husband to play World of Warcraft with you.
Right.
So I did the art for that. It was lots of drawings that look like cartoons, kind of.
Right, sweet.
So,
were you involved in the design of that at all, or just the art? Like, was it commissions based, or?
I remember that the person I collaborated with, he did most of the design, but I did it was just figuring out what the character should look like and fleshing out a lot of the expressions and poses and stuff.
Okay. I might come back to that in a bit, because
Yeah.
that's interesting. It's something we didn't know, but could be really cool. Your trajectory is really seems unique, kind of eclectic, in like how you got
Yep.
to making games, which is really cool. It's
Yeah, and then I guess to get closer to making games, I was involved in like coming to the Mont Royal Game Society meetups when they were happening. So just kind of like on the fringes of the indie community here.
Right.
And at one of those events, I met Richard, who's one of the co-founders of Cleaver Endeavor.
Right.
And he was just kind of scouting out, trying to get a team together to start a game company.
Okay.
And then he got a few people together and was like, can we work together? Let's test it out. Let's do a game jam.
Sweet.
And that game jam was Ultimate Chicken Horse.
So Ultimate Chicken Horse is the product of just like a game jam.
Yeah, it is a pure game jam game.
With like additional iteration on it, I'm guessing, or?
Yeah, like lots of iteration. Like the first version was very janky, but I believe horse and chicken concept art is relatively accurate to what that first weekend game jam was.
Okay.
And a few of the blocks, maybe the art stuck around of just like the wooden block or something. So the art style kind of got figured out extremely quickly.
Wow. So I guess I'm going to jump into Chicken Horse right away, and we'll double back to some of these other questions since we're already at it.
Sure.
So as a game jam game, like when you guys started, so the starting point of this, like, did it always start as like a funny game? Was it always meant to be like a humorous game?
No, like the initial idea was just that game of horse, except applied to
Yeah.
to platforming. Like in my brain, it was just Mario. Like if Mario was a game of horse and you set up the level and both people try it, and does one person do it and the other person doesn't? And that was really just the root idea that first weekend. And it wasn't, humor wasn't an intention at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
At what point in the design process did humor become an intention, if at all? Like,
I'm pretty sure I can remember, like the biggest things I remember about being like, oh, this is funny and I have to make it funnier, were
right.
always around the deaths and
Okay.
the physics around the death.
Okay.
Because most platformer games, you die and then like it's time to restart right away. Like Super Meat Boy, you touch a saw and it's splat. And Mario, you'd fall in a pit and you're just done. Or you hit an enemy and you do that funny Mario animation,
Right.
death animation. And it's pretty, like, it's over. Whereas in our game, you die and then the game is still going because the other people are still alive. So your body has a long time to do stuff if
Yeah.
that's the case. And like,
Right.
I don't remember when we decided that the bodies should stay present. Because you certainly could just have them poof away after you die, but we left them around and then just funny stuff started happening. And then we started tweaking the physics a
Right.
bit so that the funny stuff happened more. So
Like, what specifically? Like,
so some of the big ones, like the earliest ones would be the arrow shooter. When it hits you with arrows,
right.
it does a little bit of a knockback. And the way that knockback, I think there's probably slightly different knockback for once your body's dead.
Right.
And then the way the arrows go in it, like if the arrows went in it, like pierced your body, your little animal bodies,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
did it over and over again in the same way, you wouldn't see all of the arrows. So I
Right.
actually like added code that would make them splay out a little bit so
Yeah.
it looks funnier.
Yeah.
And things like, what are some other big ones? Like when we did the punching plant,
Yeah.
the arc that the punching plant punches you in is specifically designed so that two punching plants can play volleyball with you if you set them up adjacent to each other, and they'll just do it forever, hit you
Right.
back and forth. What other type of stuff would we have done? Like there's the fan that just blows upwards. That's definitely tweaked so that it works well with dead bodies,
Right.
so that you float around on them and it looks kind of funny.
Yeah. So, oh, go ahead. Keep going.
Oh, and one big thing was like during, like after the first game jam, and once we were becoming more serious, there was a time when I had to go very deep into making the animation better.
Right.
And a big part of that, or a reasonably big part of that, was the death animations of like, there's like 4 or 5 different states that your body can have of like falling down, flying up, on the ground. There's some animations of like the moment of impact when you get hit by something, your body kind of almost looks like it's being electrocuted.
Right.
So all of that stuff was very intentional to let the death physics work well.
Yeah, so it seems like the physics, like the visuals and the physics of this are very deliberate, like very like labor intensive, specific design. What about like the choices you're making make those particular choices you made funny? Like, what do you think it is about? And they are like, as someone who loves Chicken Horse, like every detail of that produces some kind of like, this is funny. What is it, do you think, that makes them funny?
There's always been a certain, what would I call it? What's the term? What's the name for a person in a comedy who's like the straight man. Like, I've always tried to like keep the art pretty, I don't know about serious or flat, but like I'm not trying to go really exaggerated in how crazy any of the art is.
Right.
Like the chicken and the horse and all the characters, they're relatively bland designs in
Okay.
some ways. Like
Yeah.
they don't have giant expressions. They don't have big shiny eyes. They don't have pupils. They don't like they're not like really expressive cartoon characters. They're like they do express themselves, but it's a
Right.
lot more a little low key, I think. And I kind of think that like there's some I don't know if there's something about like if you keep it a little more serious when all the funny goofy physics start happening, it just plays better. Like
Right. Yeah.
the chicken wasn't funny and then the funny physics happens to it and now it's funnier in contrast.
Right. So do you think most of the humor in Chicken Horse comes from like the art style or the mechanics or like that interplay?
I think most of the humor comes from like the Rube Goldberg physics
Right.
outcomes that you didn't expect.
Okay.
And then it also comes from like the people playing it. Like we just provide the tools
Right.
for people to make the jokes.
Right. Which brings me to this of like when you were making those tweaks, like where did the feedback come from? Like was it from like internal testing? Was it just you guys playing? Or was it from the game jam? Did you guys have like beta testers or like an audience that you would play the game for and then decide like, oh, that's not funny for them? Like how are you deciding what was funny and what wasn't and how did you?
So the early days, like we showed the game very soon after the game jam at the Mount Royal Game Society, and then the audience there just was like laughing and yelling, so we knew we were onto something.
Right.
And then we did a lot of shows that first year. Like we went to the Montreal Comic Con, and I think it was MIGV, like the Montreal Indie Game Festival.
Right.
So we were like going to as many shows as we could, and so that was just like every day of those was just play testing and like watching people play and react and laugh at it. Once we got to our Kickstarter, we had a demo that we put out, and so that once that was in the wild, a few YouTubers did start playing it.
Okay.
So then at that point we would have started watching them and seeing what was funny, and then I don't know how much of it got tweaked like after we put it out, if we'd have to tweak it more, but I definitely would have been like thinking about if this was in a video, would it be funny? And then being like satisfied when it actually happened. Like I'm sure I wanted that punching plant volleyball thing to happen. So I like made it, and then like it happened on a video. I was like, yes, it worked. Like they fell from my trap of making something funny.
What was the difference for you between watching like either between the different like locales, like the conventions or jams that you were going to, different audiences playing the game, and then when it arrived on YouTube? So either the difference between the different places you were showing the game off, having those little like localized testing groups, was there a huge difference between how different things were received in the game in terms of the humor between those places, and then between those spaces in YouTube? Was there like, were different things like a hit as far as the comedy goes?
I think it actually was pretty similar, and I think that's probably why it worked.
Right.
Like the game shows very well at conventions, and I think it shows well on YouTube for the same reasons.
Right.
And I kind of think that like this game hits that target well of like being good to watch either at a convention or on YouTube, whereas and it does well on the market, where there might be other games that like do well on the market, but probably wouldn't show that well
Right.
on at a convention or at YouTube because it's more just like one person playing and like they're really engrossed, but maybe it's not that cool to watch
Do you have
or
an
it's
example?
complicated.
If you
What
don't,
am I
it's
thinking
fine.
about? Well, I'm just thinking about like, I don't know, I don't have a good example, but some RTS or, well, even like something like Overwatch is like overly complicated to watch.
Sure.
There's just so much going on, and it's like you have to know the map and all the characters. So whenever I try and get someone else to watch that who's not a fan, they're like, I can't tell what's going on. It's just random colors splashing around.
Right. It's actually a good time to get into this because like I would agree that my first introduction to Chicken Horse was watching people on YouTube play it, right? And it was one of those things of like, this is one of the few games I'm watching people play and I'm finding absolutely hilarious, such that I have to get in on this and I have to get everyone I know to sit around this and play this because it's just funny and fun, right?
Yeah.
And there's kind of a recent phenomenon of like the memeability of a game, like how well does this transform into a tweet or into an image that's going to promote the game. Fall Guys is a big one that recently just came out, and some games maybe, like you're right to point out, the joke or even the overall experience of play doesn't hold up super well, and it's more designed for, the meme culture of the game.
Yeah.
Was that a consideration when you guys were designing the game? Like how repostable is this? How shareable are the funny moments?
It definitely was on our mind. And it like trying to make funny things be able to happen was definitely on our mind. I don't feel like we had to modify the game too much to make it fit that requirement.
Right.
And that's probably one of the lucky things about the project was just like from the get-go it makes decent content that's just like, whereas some other games maybe you'd have to adjust them more to get it to that point. I'm sure we were always thinking about like, oh, can we get like a replay system or like a button that makes a GIF? We never got around to it. It probably would be a good idea. Just like to add some systems to help that sharing happen.
Right.
Though I don't actually think like I think the game is optimally shared on YouTube where you get the whole escalation of like the map going from simple to more complicated.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas just the GIFs of it, I don't think they work that well. Like
Right.
just a 10-second GIF of Ultimate Chicken Horse, it's okay, but it's not amazing. Just because like the maps can be really chaotic, and if you weren't there for the whole creation of it, it's a little overwhelming, I
Right.
think.
Right.
Whereas, like I remember trying to make trailers, and if you just use footage that's just captured from real live gameplay, there's no like focal point to anything.
Yeah.
Whereas in the trailers, I'd like make a level. It's just like this level is all arrows, and like that'll never happen in a real match.
Yeah.
But for the trailer, it's just like it focuses the mind, and it's like there's arrows in the game.
Right.
So yeah, I think it doesn't hit that. I think there's some games that are probably better at being GIFs, like Bridge. What is the one? Bridge Builder?
Bridge Builder? Yeah.
Or I don't remember whatever the most recent really popular bridge game was. That one, like the 15-second GIF was the perfect export from that.
Yeah, because every round of that is basically just that length of sending the thing over the bridge, right? Like it's the perfect encapsulation of the focus of that game. Whereas Chicken Horse is really interesting because like a lot of what you described in terms of the humor for like your own input to it was like those those little moments where they actually do kind of work as a GIF, like the horse getting shot with arrows and getting
Yeah.
tossed around. But like there's kind of like the short form joke in Chicken Horse, like the visual gags. But then you do have this really long form thing that just gets funnier and funnier as you create this more ridiculous level. And Scott was talking about this too, if he wants to jump in here, of like you can just build up this really ridiculous thing, and a lot of the laughs come from like, this level shouldn't exist, and is it even possible to do this, right? And
Yeah.
there's a thing of, and maybe talking about that in terms of like your promotional strategy around the game, not necessarily the meme part of it, but in how you're designing trailers and getting this game to people's attention without them having sit down and play it first, like at a jam in a place where this is exactly what's going to happen. It's like, how do you try and convey like the essence of this game, the funniness of this game when you're promoting it, when it really is such a long form joke, often going from like, you know, between 2 to 10 minutes of play before it reaches like that peak of like, this is how funny you're going to find this game if you stick with it, but you have to have that investment. Like, how do you do that? How do you approach that?
I think the initial Kickstarter trailer that we made, that story was like, it's a very direct trailer where like I literally just explain the rules of the game right at the beginning, and it's just like, this is the rules of the game and this is what happens, and then we just escalate the visuals of like showing a simple level and then a more and more complicated one until it's overwhelming. And then I think we used almost the same like escalation of action in the main launch trailer, where it just shows the rules very simply at the beginning, and it escalates until it's like, you're flying into a black hole and there's a million doors and arrows, and so that the trailer was decently effective.
Right.
And then like the thing that we didn't have control over, but that was our marketing, was the YouTubers that like they told the story with all of their videos over and over and over and over again.
That's super interesting. Do you feel like the trailer was, or the series of trailers that you've done before the YouTube stuff, where you really do get these full-length plays and people are more acclimated to watching like in that format, like, do you think they captured the actual like way that Chicken Horse is funny, or do you think it was more like a film cut type situation where you're really going for like, you're conveying the idea of this game is funny to get them to sit in front of the game even though they're not sure necessarily the way that it's going to be funny, right? If you know what I'm getting at, like in terms of when you're watching a film, the timing is very different often, or even like a cartoon or something, right? You have quick cuts, like the way the joke is told is different. Do you think you like applied some of that to making those trailers?
I think most of the time our trailers we wouldn't be trying to make them that funny.
Right.
I think mostly we were focused on the like, just can you please understand the game rules?
Right.
And like the escalating action, and it'll be hilarious, like it'll be crazy, but I'm not sure there's a few times where I'm sure we were like, this is the joke, please laugh at it, but
Right.
usually it wouldn't be, I think. I don't know. Let me see a little bit. Look at the old trailers.
Yeah, take a look.
Like, I remember there was one trailer that was definitely like, we're trying to be funny.
Right.
Like the Ultimate Chicken Horse Elephantastic Explosions trailer, where it's just like we're showing off that we added little explosions to all the items and they get blown up. And that one, it's like we picked music to try to be funny, and it's more like a trailer that's trying to be funny, but yeah.
So I think I'm going to double back here for a sec to like the long form design, because here you're talking about like trying to be funny, and when playing Chicken Horse, it does really read like a game that very successfully is trying to be funny. And in some of the animations and stuff, it's very clearly the case. But now hearing you talk about the trailers, I'm kind of wondering if like how much in designing it were you actually trying to be funny, like mechanically? Because I know you had all these visual flares that were making the game funny, but actually, if you're just trying to convey the rules to people and actually just trying to make an interesting game, like, what was the balance between in a round of chicken horse getting from point A to point B? How much are we looking for challenge versus the platform for laughter between the players or because of just the animations in the game? Like, what was that balance for you guys?
Um, it's heavily tilted towards it being a competitive game.
Right.
But then we make a few concessions because things are funny.
Okay.
It's like we'll make an exception to this thing being perfectly competitive because it's funny. So like if we were making a perfectly competitive game, you probably wouldn't want the bodies to influence outcomes that much.
Sure.
Just because, I don't know, just the hardcore players would be like, no, that's too much randomness. But then, like, we did the thing where you die, and then if your body hits the flag, it's a post-mortem. You get some points.
Yeah.
It counts.
Right.
And that actually does add, it's funny, and then it actually adds, like, some levels are impossible unless you post-mortem on them, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's a great mechanic too, and it's hilarious. It's like a perfect storm, even of like whether it was intended or not to be funny or whatever it was. It's great. Another one that Scott rightly pointed out was the coin. That isn't you just look at the coin and you place it somewhere, and in and of itself, it's not like haha, this is hilarious, and yet it is the source of so much humor in that game.
Yes.
Of like you see, I mean, can you just talk before I give my opinion on the coin? Can you just talk a bit about the coin, like where that came in terms of your design and what you thought it was doing in the game?
Well, that's definitely one where it's like you're gonna put that in and you're gonna tempt somebody, and like you're using it as temptation, and it's
Right.
just like you let the players tempt the other people into something stupid. And make it like a race so that everybody has to go after it at the same time as fast as they can.
Right.
Yeah, that's definitely one where it's like we give it to the players and it is up to them to make it funny, and then they will do it.
Almost without fail.
Yeah. It's also makes me think of teleporters, where we, like a big part of the teleporter design is that you only get one and it's useless at first.
Right.
And then afterwards someone else can put the other one down and actually set the path. So it makes it a collaborative story. Like you can't just be like, oh, I have both ends of the teleporter, I'm just going to put this here and this here, that's my plan. You're like leaving it up to the chaos of the group to do something with it. And then it lets them make the story of like, oh, I put the teleporter down and nobody noticed, and now I just jumped past the whole level.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, the whole game is very collaboratively funny once it's in the hands of the players too. As a team, were a lot of the decisions about like what goes in the game, what isn't funny, the direction you should go, were those made collaboratively, or like was there like a top-down structure in terms of like this is funny but it gets in the way of the competition, so it doesn't, of the competitiveness of the game, so it doesn't make the cut? Like, how did you guys decide as a group what stayed, what went?
It's mostly like it probably kind of felt reasonably obvious at the time if something was funny but didn't really fit. Like, I don't remember having to have very big arguments. Usually it would just be like, everyone would see that's funny and be like, yeah, we'll leave it in. Like, we weren't, like the tone of the game was always going to be goofy, so it was easy to make those decisions of like, it is goofy, so we'll leave it in even if it's kind of buggy or it won't be perfectly competitive.
Sure. What do you think the challenge is? I don't know if you've worked on any more serious games, but I mean, even as being in the audience of serious games, a player of games in general, what do you think the challenge is in making either humor like in a more serious game or just a serious game with a message that might end up being funny inadvertently as opposed to like designing for like a party game or a goofy game like Chicken Horse, to quote you on that description of Chicken Horse.
So what would the challenges be?
Yeah, so in designing either like kind of more pointed narrative jokes, or to put humor in a game that tonally is maybe a bit more serious in general compared to like Chicken Horse, which is, the premise is funny. Horse and chicken platforming around, at worst is like, oh, that's funny. Right? At best, like, as you guys have done, it actually leads to, in concert with all the mechanics, something that is really, like, honestly hilarious, consistently, over time, right? Mm-hmm. But, like, out of that environment, like, outside of, like, a Jackbox situation where you're providing a platform, what do you think the challenges of, like, creating humor in a more serious game, either as you've designed it or just kind of observed it as a player?
I think something that would be hard is if you pick the wrong art style that, like I was just reading the like Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, and like in it there's some section where he's talking about like he shows some drawings of like very serious things of like a still life of apples, and it's a very serious drawing or painting, and then you show like a cartoon picture of an apple. Mm-hmm. And they just have a very different fundamental feeling to them.
Right.
And I get the sense that a lot of games, just the way engines render things and just the tendency of 3D art is that you get pushed towards that still life feel, and it doesn't leave the right room in people's brains to just fill in the blanks and make it funny.
Right.
Or like, whereas just cartoon art, I feel like it's like 80% of the way there to being funny sometimes.
Right.
But once you like try to 3D render something, it's possible that you'll like get stuck in the uncanny valley and it just won't land.
Right, yeah.
And
go ahead.
Just another thought would be like if you're trying to make something funny, it can't be repetitive. Like like you can't say the same joke over and over again. It's just not going to work.
Right.
So it's a very hard thing if you're designing something other than a single playthrough game to put humor in that isn't really player generated.
Yeah. Why do you think that doesn't work for a single player game and I mean, this wouldn't work like ad infinitum, but like when I play Chicken Horse, I have a friend that I play Chicken Horse with, and every time without fail there's like a dead body hitting the flagpole, he will laugh, and he's probably seen it over 50 times at this point. And so I'm with you in that, like, a repetitive joke, it there's a certain point where it gets old, but like, what do you think it is about, like, maybe the players themselves, the player interaction or something, but it's not even, because for him, he just laughs when it hits the flagpole. Do you have any insight? And maybe you don't, and that's fine, because I don't either. It's why I'm asking the question. Like, what do you think it is about your game specifically that does that? Like, it's a kind of magic, to quote Freddie Mercury, right? Like,
my only guess is that we don't just celebrate a lot in the game. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a lot of stuff that is very bland compared to what other games do. Like, you touch the flag and the character like does a little tiny dance.
Yeah.
Like, there's no like fireworks that go off. Mm-hmm. Nothing barely anything happens.
Yeah.
There might be like a sound effect. Maybe it's an animal voice sound effect, but it's not a lot. And then you win, and it's like you're the ultimate animal.
Yeah.
That is it. There's no like, and I kind of think that if you keep it toned down, I think that helps it last longer.
Right,
It's
right.
kind of like your friend has to fill in for the lack
Yeah.
of output from the game. It's like, well, I'll celebrate because the game is barely doing anything for me.
I mean, it really is. It's in terms of like the McLeod understanding comics. It's the closure, right? If you let the audience do the work, it saves you a lot of labor. It makes the outcome for you significantly better. You presented them actually nothing, the absence of space, and yet the result is so good. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true. It works. All right. So I'm gonna switch gears really quickly, unless either of my two co-interviewees want to hop in and have a question on the back of what we talked about so far. Either one. I'll give them a sec to light up their mics. Nope. All right. Um, I'm gonna jump to live streaming in a sec because you talked about like YouTube and having that like really help the game and kind of both show the funny side and the game side, even though they're connected. But what about live streaming? Like, do you think live streaming changed the way that humor is being approached in games, just generally? Maybe not even necessarily for Chicken Horse, but like, what does the existence and like the prevalence of live streaming now do to like a design decision? Like when you sit down to make a game, if anything.
Um, what would it do? Well, just the first thing was that we did put like a live streaming interaction into Chicken Horse.
Right.
So there's like the voting thing where the audience can vote on what blocks they want next.
Mm-hmm.
So like finding room for that audience to interact would be on my mind making another game.
Right.
Though it's a tricky like type of feature because it sounds really good as like I don't know, you just say like, oh, your audience can influence the game. And a bunch of games have started doing it, but I kind of feel like I don't think it helps sell games that much.
Right.
Like, I don't think, like the audience probably has some fun with it. The streamer has some fun, but it doesn't feel that impactful. I don't know for sure, but I really don't think streamers are playing more of games because they have audience interaction.
Right. It's not like there's
Yeah, like maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't. I don't know. I don't think the top games are just all audience interaction games.
No, I mean,
I think.
definitely not the case. But for
Yeah.
a smaller game, like, I could see where the boost would come in. Do you think it's important to engage that audience in terms of, like, humor, though? Like, I'm like, because you think of Chicken Horse as, like, it's meant to be a multiplayer game, right? And that already has kind of one of our other interviewees talked about, you add more people, the game gets funnier. And maybe I'll give you that quote and be like, what do you think of that statement, like, in terms of games? And then in the context of live streaming, like, every time you have, like, if you're adding those features for an audience, you're technically adding more people into the game experience. So what do you think about that?
I wouldn't completely agree. Like, I think you need to have a reasonable, like the 4 people in Chicken Horse works pretty well to tell the story of like the longer 10-minute game, where like I know that the achievement hunters, when they play the game on YouTube, there's usually one guy who always wins, and like that's become part of the story.
Right.
And if you have like 16 people in an Ultimate Chicken Horse game, I think it would be too many people to really like make any story around anything that's going on. Not to say I am interested in the concept of like, oh, what if you do Fall Guys style, like 60 people playing Ultimate Chicken Horse at once? Mm-hmm. And I'd like to know what happens.
Right.
But I don't know for sure if it would be better or funny.
Right.
It might be more of an average of like you just see the average of what all the people do instead of the edge cases.
Sure. What do you think of Fall Guys, by the way?
I've started.
Can be off
I've
the
played a
record.
few rounds. I've played a few rounds, and it's okay. I haven't been able to like get to the final 20 or anything yet.
Right.
It doesn't have like I feel confident that our game is still funnier,
I would
kind
agree
of
with you.
like especially just because like the levels aren't going to change. Like
Right.
so if they put some more stuff, if they had anything that was like level editing, that could be cool. There's another big concept that like has been on our mind about like Ultimate Chicken Horse and why it works. And part of it is it's a 4-person platformer on a single screen where there's one camera and you can see everybody all the time.
Yeah.
And I think there's something very essential about that to making Ultimate Chicken Horse work.
Right.
Like if it was a 3D game where everybody was local to themselves and didn't see the whole map all the time,
Right.
it wouldn't work as well. And that's like a theory we have. There's a little bit of evidence that I think we're right. Like someone made a prototype of a kart racing version of Ultimate Chicken
Right.
Horse,
Okay.
and we played it. So that means that it's like Mario Kart. You
Yeah.
only see yourself, and like it's not a finished game. It's just a prototype, but we didn't
Right.
quite feel the magic from it. So
Right.
maybe there's something there where like Fall Guys, you just see yourself, and so it's not that communal experience.
I have a question from Andre here that builds on this. Do you think it's the more freeform nature of Ultimate Chicken Horse as opposed to more game show style is why the game feels like funnier?
I do think there's a definite like we intentionally made the game very, I'd say, calm and flat, and like the animals are playing on like an abandoned rooftop, an abandoned farm.
Yeah.
It's not flashy. Like there is a lot of flashiness going on in Fall Guys that I think gets tiring after a while.
Yeah.
Just like if you're gonna play 1,000 games of Fall Guys, like some of that stuff is gonna get a little bit over saturated, kind of like.
It's actually super interesting for Chicken Horse because until you told me that it's a very calm style, I actually never realized it. Because when you're actually playing, it's very chaotic, but it's really like mute blues, browns, like dark greens, like.
It's a very. I don't think there's any fully saturated colors in the game.
And I
almost.
think maybe part of why the joke is so good, allow me to project for a moment, is because like without even realizing, like you're doing this chaotic action over something that is really kind of washed out in a really nice way, but like that in itself is hilarious. Right? Even if the joke, it's not a ha-ha funny thing, it's just the ridiculousness that you're constantly in just by watching exactly what you're saying is on the screen, the 4 characters, the calm background, hopping over this level being built is actually part of like the long form. It is kind of repetitive joke because you play it again and again, but it's still humorous the whole time.
Yep.
Yeah, it works super well. So I'm going to double back to some of these beginning questions now, unless for Scott or Andre, do you have any more questions related specifically to Chicken Horse that I didn't get to that you guys want to ask? Chime in. It looks like we're good. All right, so I'm going to ask some of these openers that we skipped over because we slammed right into Chicken Horse here. What's a game... probably not one that you've made, but it could be another one that you've made. What's a game that you find funny? Or what's the funniest thing you've experienced in a game? If you can remember.
I suspect it's probably like Stanley Parable
Right.
stuff. I think that There was a long time ago I played it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I find that type of like narrator experience, like it probably only works a few times, but that one's very cool because it branches and you want to explore all the options of why they're funny.
Right.
Um, that's one that's very like deliberately set up, play tested to be just laugh at this moment type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. But it
Um,
works.
but it works.
Yeah.
I like Getting Over It a lot.
Right.
Um, I don't know. I definitely would like put that in the like this is a funny game, at least at the beginning when you start.
Right. Right.
And then when you make like the big fall and you're like, no, oh God, that's definitely one that I'd put in there for being a funny game.
What about it was what about it was funny? Like what really brought that out for you?
I think it's like the seriousness with which like the game is made. It's just so well animated and the
Yeah.
physics are so good. And like I think there's sound effects of like water sloshing in the cauldron or something.
Yeah.
It's like it's really it's well done, but then it's just so stupid of what you're doing. And then the narration over top of it, just
Right.
even if it's not supposed to be like hilarious, just is a full package of funny stuff.
Funny stuff. Yeah.
Um,
On the flip side of that, if you can't think of another one, what's a game that failed at being funny for you?
I'm just scrolling through my Steam library. Maybe something will jump at me.
No worries. If there's nothing you can think of, that's totally fine.
Oh, I remember I got a giant laugh out of Psychonauts.
Yeah. Where? Do you remember where?
It was like when at some point one of the guys is like it's like the very smart instructor and he
Yeah.
like sees a lamp and he's like so tacky. Oh my God, he just like can't deal with how tacky a
Right.
certain lamp is because he's like super minimalist. I just remember that joke hitting well.
So I think I'm going to double back to Get Over It for a sec and wonder like what do you think the balance is between and Chicken Horse has this too and you kind of touched upon this of humor and the frustration of a game because we've been finding that they kind of uh, they walk a fine line between each other at times whereas like things are can be hilarious but also extremely frustrating. Get Over It maybe being the prime example of like this is really funny until the moment it's not and there's a big flip there, right? I was wondering if you had any comments on like on that
Um,
notion.
that's definitely, I don't know if it was intentional, but it's definitely like if you're getting frustrated in Chicken Horse and you die, you're at least happy to see what happens to your body and it's funny.
Right.
So like
So it's a diffusal mechanism.
it's yeah, like
Yeah.
it's because often people make impossible levels and they can't beat them and it could very easily become frustration, but then it's diffused by that.
Have you seen it in all your observations of either YouTube or in person? Have you seen that tactic maybe not work? Or has it
Where
always
that
seemed to do the job of like either the other people playing diffuse like the dead player? Maybe someone has failed a bunch of times in a row. Like has it always worked in your experience watching the game or even playing Chicken Horse?
I think it almost always works. Like I'm sure there's some people who are too serious and like
Sure.
get upset about losing. Um,
Right.
and that's just like a level we can't cope with, but most of the time I think it works pretty well.
Um, so one more general question, and this is more of a it's an opinion. It's going to sound like we want you to give us a really big definition, but it's kind of just like your own philosophy towards humor, which is like, what is humor for you? How do you feel like humor works? And that like, what do you think?
Um,
And this could go back even to like, because you studied film as well. Like you clearly
yeah.
have a very solid background of like humor in different mediums, like film, games. I mean, even just physics and science in general. Like stuff, funny stuff exists there. But like,
I
what do you
guess
think?
like it seems like it's usually when it's something that is unexpected and interesting. Like
Right.
something that's just unexpected won't be funny. But if
Right.
it's unexpected and there is something interesting about it, then it's funny.
Right.
Um, like I don't know why this is flashing in my head, but I imagine like if I find out some physics fact or something or some math fact, it's like, and it's just something I would never have expected. Like I don't know, there's a YouTube channel, 3 blue 1 brown or something,
Okay.
like a math guy, and there was this video about like cubes bouncing on frictionless surfaces,
Right.
and if you count the number of bounces between the cubes, it makes pi. And it's just like, that's funny because
Yeah.
what pi is in the bouncing of cubes? What are you talking about? This doesn't
Hmm.
make any sense. So it's unexpected and interesting, and it's like, why is that? Um, so then like most jokes I could, or like most funny things in games, I think could almost be connected to that
Right. Yeah.
somehow. Of like
Yeah.
something happens that's unexpected, but then it has more depth than just being a loud sound
Right.
or
It's not.
something.
It's not just the exclamation point over your head. It's the exclamation point and the question mark together. Right. It's
Yeah,
like,
so it's like
whoa.
you not like in Ultimate Chicken Horse, you get punched by the punching plant, and then you get whipped around a black hole, and then something else happens. So
Hmm.
it's like that Rube Goldberg machine is the
Exactly.
it's that interesting thing that's happening.
Yeah. That's great. Um, I think I covered all the basic questions. We're going to ask you one more before we wrap it up. Last chance, Andre Scott. Is there anything else you wanted to throw in here?
Yeah, actually, it's actually a question that I went to ask earlier, but your cat was meowing. I didn't want to get into the mic.
Sure.
Um, but I was curious because I mean, Chicken Horse has been around for a while now, and you guys have consistently added new characters and new features into the game, where you've gone from, just the initial, I think, 4 to now 6 or 7, 8, maybe 8 characters that players can choose from. And so, like, have there been discussions around, like, specifically how you want to keep the design and aesthetic as you added both new mechanics and characters into the game? And has humor been incorporated in those conversations?
Um, I think when I think about it and just the definition I just gave of like you want to put unexpected and interesting things in, um, whenever we add like a new character, it's always like, well, what character is far outside the like what we already have? So like the last one we added was Snake. So it's like, well, there's a completely different character. It has no limbs, and
Hmm.
how's it going to move around? How's it going to dance? Um, so then it's like a bit of a harder thing to answer. Like every question about it is a little bit harder than just like, oh, we could put a cow in, and then uh, that
Right.
wouldn't really push any edges of the game. And then the same type of thing happens with the new items or levels that we put in, where it's like, is this just a replica with a new skin of an old block, or is it a fundamentally new design, and will it make new jokes? So like we added the beehive, and that was like, okay, how many, we can imagine like so many jokes that can go into that of like, okay, you scare the bees and then you run around the level with the bees following you and then the bees kill other people.
Right.
So that's like the main joke that you can tell with that.
Hmm.
Um, and then we probably spent a long time figuring out the exact rules of like how a beehive works so that it is funny, because there's a bunch of different ways that you could have the bees follow the first person, and then maybe the bees somehow get transferred to following someone else, or what happens when the first person dies. So there's a bunch of little edge cases that you have to figure out. And in general, that one we would just guide. It's just like, which thing kind of makes sense and is the funniest.
In the same manner,
Yeah.
I'm kind of just curious if you guys ever talked about like humor and then the algorithm in which these pieces come up. Because I mean, like some of the blocks and stuff are mainly there to be building blocks so the level can actually function. Whereas like, other ones are definitely meant to bring in that like where you're laughing with your friends because they got shot by a crossbow bolt or hit by a tennis ball comet. And so I'm curious if like you guys actually, for the dropping of like the rates in which, those more humor-based game pieces or the more, I guess, fun in air quotes game pieces to come up, like was there an actual discussion on how often we want to make these things prevalent? Like you mentioned the teleporter a bit and how you intentionally made it so there was never two at the same time, but I was wondering if you guys had like actual conversations about that piece.
Well, so the algorithm for getting new blocks is based on more of like a player success, that like we don't want the game to devolve in everybody winning or everybody losing for too long. So then if everybody's losing, then we start to give easier pieces and some bombs. And we just define easier as in like a simple platformer. Like a simple platform is easier than a spinning saw.
Yeah.
But then if everybody's succeeding too much, then we start giving more and more deadly items to help end that and hopefully get it so that just one or two people get to the end instead of everybody. In terms of like the actual humor of the algorithm, I don't think we thought about that too much. In the back of my mind, one thing that's been rolling around is like as the game gets bigger, the selection of items is so big that I kind of am worried that at some point there'll just be too much on the screen at once of like too many different items. Yeah. And I have thought about like maybe at the beginning of a round it secretly disables some stuff so there's less potential options, and that round would be kind of like it's a little skewed towards more arrows, so it's kind of like an arrow level. But we never have implemented that. It's just something I ponder that might be needed if we have too many items.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thanks. And I had one more question, if you don't mind. I know we're
no problem. I'm good.
The last one was actually just around the level design. I know that you guys kind of were going on the idea of like you make your own platform, but I think back to like one of my favorite levels, which is just the bridge, where like overplaying it, you kind of slowly destroy your path, and you have to either preemptively think ahead of time to make it or not. But a lot of the maps have like very distinct ways that they've been approached for like kind of how players need to play them out or will end up playing them out. And so I was wondering kind of what conversations around humor and the actual design of the level kind of went into it, and also the fact that you kind of have a slight narrative for some of them, right? Like there's like a farmhouse scenario in one of them, or like you have like the factory, which kind of has this like you're pulling on things that players might be able to relate to.
Yeah. For the example of like the crumbling bridge, that definitely is one of the cases where like I had the vision of like everybody's gonna destroy the thing they need. It's like the tragedy of the commons that these people, like the players are definitely going to destroy the whole bridge very soon, and they're going to laugh about it.
It's even funny just to hear you talk about it. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, so I don't remember, like, usually the levels are a little bit of like one person will have the idea and then present it to the team and be like, and then we'll agree or disagree that like that's going to work for a level. And then usually lots of play testing to see if it actually is a fun level. So yeah, like the pier with the big wave that comes in, that's just an obviously funny story to us. Though we tend to find that I think the levels that are a little more open have I would guess have longer longevity. I'm not sure if our stats say that, but just like Jungle Temple with the big boulder that comes through,
Right.
it's a very good story, but I don't know exactly how many times you want to see the same thing over and over
Right.
again.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do get a little more gimmicky as we've gone on of like, yeah, I wouldn't want like every level to be the jungle temple where there's a big boulder and it's just always going to play out the same way.
Yeah, especially when the core of the game is so strong. Like, I know for myself, the simple levels I think make for the best because it's what the players do. But
Yeah.
Scott, you good with that?
Yeah, it's good. I just, because every time I play that bridge level, I spend the first round just hopping on all the blocks near the front to break them all. And every single time I just laugh at how like ridiculous it is, but it's like the only level where I find whenever I play it, I'm actively like my play behavior is actually changed. While the other ones is very much like, okay, how am I going to kill everyone? But this one is like, I need to destroy this first and then I can kill everyone. And I don't know, I appreciate like the time for it, so I was just curious about it.
Do you guys play with the modifiers very much?
No, I don't.
I have. It gets really crazy really fast.
Yeah.
Maybe we do later. Scott, you want to play some chicken horse later?
Always. Man.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're gonna do the wrap up. We have one final question, which is there anything we didn't ask you that you were hoping we would ask you?
Let's see.
Or if you have like a Humour in Games manifesto that you've been sitting on for a few years that you really want to get out there, like you can do that now also.
Well, I guess just one thing that came into my mind that we didn't bring up is the scoring system.
Right.
Just we reward players specifically for things that are funny.
Right.
And I think that also helps where it's just like you get rewarded for the traps and the postmortems and
Yeah. That's
all of that stuff. And I think so like we actually do directly feed into the humor and like it is actually incentivized. So I don't know if that actually changes things. I don't know if that's part of what makes it funny, but maybe it is.
I mean, I would say if that's your endpoint for this, I would say so many things in that game that go right to make it good and funny. Like all of it, all the little choices you made, and it's not like hearing you talk at the beginning of this about like all the little details in the animation. It's no surprise that there's that level of thought going into all of it for a game this good. Like really,
and just one funny thing is that like I'm slightly surprised to be like I was like, oh, a Humour in Games podcast. I guess our game is funny. Like it really did, like it wasn't on our mind of like, oh, we're gonna make the funniest game anyone's ever played. It just happened.
That was our interview with Kyler. Thanks again to the Tag Lab for supporting this series, and thanks to you for listening.